Status conditions are a key mechanic in tons of RPGs, and especially in Pokémon. Poison, Paralysis, and Burn are probably the first ones that come to mind, but the full list of status conditions is quite extensive and includes everything from the prevention of sound-based moves to being plagued by nightmares from a shadow monster. Jeez, I thought these were kids' games. A lot of the time we as fans associate these status conditions with specific typings. Burn is often a result of fire moves, Poison a result of, well, poison, and Confusion often being a result of several psychic moves like Confusion. Okay, maybe it is just a kid's game. There are plenty of moves that can inflict a status different from their type, but for the most part we associate certain effects with certain typings. Thinking about this in depth led me to the question, what if every type had a chance to inflict its own status condition? In other words, just like how most electric moves have a small chance to paralyze, what if every type of move had a chance to inflict its own signature status effect? I've done some research, and with a combination of existing status conditions in Pokémon, along with influence from other RPGs, I was able to make a complete list of statuses for every type in the game. And now I'm here to tell you about it, because why else would I spend my time doing that? Before we get started, be sure to drop a like down below and subscribe to the channel for more Pokémon content. My dog and I would both appreciate it. Let's get started with the easiest of the bunch: Fire, Electric, Ice, and Poison. These four already have status conditions associated with them, but it's important to fully review their mechanics as they help set the standard for many of the new statuses. Burn has two effects, taking away 1/16 of HP every turn, and halving the user's attack stat, the second of which is especially good to remember for later. Paralysis also has two effects, a 25% chance to do nothing each turn, and similar to Burn, halving the user's speed stat. Then there's Freeze, which fully immobilizes a Pokémon, giving it a 1 in 5 chance to thaw out every turn. Lastly, Poison is a bit special. Of course there's the standard Poison, which takes away a 16th of HP every turn, but there's also Badly Poisoned, which is the same concept, but adds an additional 16th every passing turn. I know most of you know these details already, but if I didn't go over them, somebody would inevitably say I forgot about them. And like I said, it's important to see how these existing statuses affect the new ones. Like with the Steel type's new status effect. Inspired by Poison, I'm giving Steel both a piercing and bleeding effect. Bleeding is a pretty common status effect in RPGs, typically draining the character's HP over time. Splitting this into piercing and bleeding gives us the same dichotomy as the Poison type, as there's a less pressing version contrasted with a more immediate worry. Unfortunately, I doubt this one would happen because I don't think the Pokémon Company wants to be associated with anything mentioning blood. Well, I guess except for Blood Moon Ursaluna. What a monster. Quick challenge for you. These typings won't be in any particular order, so see if you can guess which one I'm going to mention last. Just don't guess the Psychic type, because that's next. I already mentioned earlier that Psychic is commonly associated with the Confusion status, so who am I to break up a good thing? To recap, Confusion afflicts the user with a 1 in 3 chance to hit themselves, it lasts anywhere from 1 to 4 turns, and it disappears when you switch out. Looking at these mechanics, I realized that this same logic could be applied to another popular RPG status effect, being Blindness. Most RPGs use blindness in a way that affects accuracy, so blindness can be used in the exact same way as Confusion, except instead of hitting yourself, you hit nothing. What I really find amusing about this is that it would be objectively better to be blinded than confused, but I feel like more players would be upset about missing completely as opposed to hitting themselves. I feel like it has something to do with all the Focus Blast and Stone Edge memes I've seen over the years. Moving right along, here we have Fairy. This is the last typing to be given an already existing status condition, being Infatuation. Because of course people are infatuated with fairy types. Just think about all those fairies people love to fawn over. Like Granbull, Aromatisse, Klefki, ooh. Okay, maybe not the best examples, but Infatuation is still the perfect status for fairies, as many of them have cute charm for an ability anyways. Infatuation causes the Pokemon to do nothing 50% of the time as it's immobilized by love, which is also how I would describe most of my interactions with my dog. Infatuation only goes away when the infatuated Pokemon switches out, or when the one it's lusting after switches out or faints itself. It's definitely an annoying status condition, which is also a good time to bring up that while I tried to keep all these effects as balanced as I could, there are going to be some statuses that are just better than others, just like the typings themselves. Now let's look at the Dragon type. If we apply similar logic to the Fairy situation, I think it's safe to say that most dragons would instill a big sense of fear in almost any opponent. Fear itself is actually a mechanic used in several other RPGs, so its placement here works pretty well. Now there's a variety of ways RPGs have used this status over the years, but here I think it's best used by preventing a Pokemon from using any attacking moves, sort of like a reverse taunt. Now at first I thought this would be overpowered, but considering the concept of this video, this status would only come as a result of dragon moves, which are arguably the least useful for offense as they only hit themselves for super effective damage. Plus, Fear would work along the same lines as Infatuation, meaning it goes away when the Afraid Pokemon swaps or when the Fear Inflictor goes down. All in all, I think this is a really fitting status for dragons. I mean, who wouldn't be afraid of Diplin? Next to look at is the fighting type. With Dragon working as a reverse taunt, fighting is a great spot to implement the actual taunt effect, but with a twist. I chose to give fighting a status condition named Reckless. At first I wanted this to work like a Berserk effect, but there's a couple of issues. Most Berserk effects in RPGs increase damage output, but either make the user uncontrollable or attack at random. With most Pokemon battles being a one-on-one, and only having 4 moves as opposed to the longer list of actions and skills in other RPGs, it didn't seem like the perfect fit. So instead, I decided on Reckless. With this status, a Pokemon would be inflicted with the taunt effect and would also deal recoil damage to themselves with every attack they used. This would go away upon switching out, or maybe at the end of battle as a whole. I really enjoy the recoil aspect of this in particular, as it's something Pokemon doesn't play around with as often as it could, and honestly should. The next type I want to look at is Ghost. Upon looking into this idea, I immediately knew what the Ghost status would be named. Spooked. Mostly because it's fun to say. Spooked. As for the effect itself, I thought something similar to Infatuation would work well, but further consideration led me to the very simple effect of switching the opponent out to a random Pokemon, or ending the battle in the case of a wild encounter, just like Whirlwind or Roar. I don't know about you, but personally, if I was spooked by a Ghost type, I would get the hell out of there immediately. Just think of all those spooky Pokemon, like Sandygast, and Sinistea, and Litwick. Next up I have the Grass type. This was especially difficult as Grass has a number of options. Sleep is probably the most obvious one, but even for a hypothetical list, giving every Grass move the chance to put something to sleep is just too overpowered. I felt similarly about an HP draining effect, but it's not as overpowered of a choice, so it could replace what I chose just as well. As for what I decided on, Grass would inflict the status Rooted. Performing the opposite effect of Spooked, Rooted would prevent the opponent from switching out. This effect could last anywhere from 3 to 5 turns, but I think 3 is the magic number. To some this may seem like an underwhelming status, but in a competitive setting this could really ruffle some feathers. Or I guess, rustle some leaves? The Rooted effect would be distinct from the effects of Mean Look because it would last even if the Pokemon who caused the roots switched out. And with 3 full turns of your opponent being rooted, you could switch to a better matchup and set up twice before your opponent could switch to something else. Quite the rustling of some leaves, huh? Finishing up the starter trio, here's the Water type. Unlike Grass, this one was a lot easier. I decided to name this status Flooded. A flooded Pokemon would always move second and would also have their evasion stat cut in half. The concept here is simply, you're wet, you can't move that fast, you can't dodge that fast. Pretty simple, but it would be an effective status condition, especially if you gave it one more tweak, which would make a flooded Pokemon weak to ice moves. I could still go either way for this detail, but overall it would be more interesting if statuses influenced the type chart, sort of how a Pokemon hit with the move Tarshot is suddenly weak to fire moves. Also, it'd be really funny to see certain Pokemon soaked. You know, as long as they would survive it. The Bug type was a little difficult to decide on, and while I'm happy with what I chose, it's one of the only status effects I don't want to see implemented. Mostly because its concept is mortifying. The Bug effect would be Infested. So, quick fourth wall break. I somehow scripted and recorded all of this before remembering that infestation is already a thing. So let's just pretend for the rest of this segment that it isn't a thing. Cool? Cool. It would be the exact same thing as Fire type, where they'd lose a 16th of HP every turn, but instead of having the attack stat, it would have the special attack stat. There's already a bit of a precedent for this, as the Dynamax move Max Flutterby in Sword and Shield had the secondary effect of lowering the opponent's special attack. Not to mention, special attack is often associated with the mind, and a swarm of bugs all over me would definitely mess with my mind. Ugh, I need to stop thinking about it. So instead I'll think about both ground and flying, which would have the effects of Shaken and Flustered. These two cover our last main stats very well, with Shaken having defense and Flustered having special defense. In addition to this, I think it would be interesting for Shaken to have the user's crit chance, while Flustered doubles the user's chance of being crit. I look at them like this. With Shaken, you're unstable and it's harder to land that perfect strike. With Flustered, you're thrown off and not as aware, making it easier for your opponent to land a perfect strike. Both of these statuses would go away upon switching out, and while they could last a limited number of turns like Confusion or Blindness, I feel like they're already a pretty non-threatening status, so only losing the effect by switching seems like the better balance. Overall, I feel like these two help to fill those stat gaps pretty nicely. Our penultimate typing is the Rock type, and to be honest, this one was easily the most difficult for me to figure out. For a while I thought Blindness could fit here with the mentality of pocket sand, but this effect seemed better suited for the Dark type. Many RPGs have a petrified effect, but they usually turn the character to stone, completely inhibiting them from doing anything, which is way too broken to be a status condition in Pokémon. So instead I decided to tweak it and made a less harmful version of petrified, sort of like petrified light. The Pokémon would still be turned to stone and wouldn't be able to do anything, but it would immediately break out of that state once they were hit with an attack. It could also go away upon switching out, but maybe that would make it too easy of a status condition to deal with, so I'll leave it up to you. This felt like a decent balance, but out of every status condition, it's still the one I'm least satisfied with, so if you have an idea of what could fit the Rock type, please let me know in the comments. Our last type to take a look at is Normal. For one, congrats to those of you that guessed the correct type. But more importantly, what kind of status effect do you do for the type meant to be completely neutral? My status effect for the Normal type would be Null, which would have the very simple effect of negating all type interactions. If your Pokemon has the Null status, everything hits you for normal damage, and you hit everything for normal damage, regardless of the move. Now this would be a cool concept to play around with. I could go down a full rabbit hole with this concept alone. It'll probably never happen, but it would be really interesting to see this status condition, as well as all the others, put into a Pokemon game in some way, shape, or form. Hey, you're a cool person for watching till the end of the video, and cool people like you should subscribe for more Pokemon content. And if you're too cool to subscribe, well, that just makes you even cooler, which means you have to do it. Just like how you have to check out this video, because the algorithm chose it for you, and it'd be rude to deny a gift. But anyways, before you go, as thanks for making it to the end of the video, here's a picture of my dog. Talk to y'all soon.